It was meant to be a weekend of laughter, a quiet reunion at their late grandfather's hunting cabin deep in the Arkansas backwoods. By Monday morning, 5 young cousins had vanished without a trace. No footprints, no signs of struggle. The cabin doors were locked from the inside, and their trucks still stood parked beneath the oak trees. For over 20 years, one question has refused to die. What happened to the Hartley cousins of Pine Hollow? The cabin sat at the edge of a forgotten ravine, swallowed by pine and limestone. Its wood was gray with age, the porch sagged, and the screen door groaned with every breath of wind. But to the Hartleys, it had always meant family, summers, fishing trips, and nights by the fire. That October of 1998, they came one by one, headlights slicing through the fog. Jesse, the eldest at 24, was studying law in Little Rock. Serious, dependable, and the one who'd called everyone together. He'd said the family needed healing after their grandfather's death. Then came Brooke, 23, her car coughing up the gravel drive. She'd been working 2 jobs in Memphis, her voice sharp with exhaustion but her hug still warm. Ryan arrived soon after, carrying his guitar and a cooler. He was the peacekeeper, the one who made silence bearable. Next was Mia, the smallest, with a camera slung around her neck, always eager to document everything. And finally, Emily, 19, reckless, loud, the spark that made them all feel young again. They stood together at the cabin's porch, staring at the shadowed windows like the house itself was watching. For a heartbeat, the woods fell silent. No crickets, no wind, just stillness. Then Ryan joked about the porch collapsing before they even got inside, and laughter broke the tension. That night, they built a fire in the stone hearth. The old cabin glowed with warmth. They roasted marshmallows, sang old songs, told stories, and Mia filmed it all, her camera shaking with laughter. Later, that same footage would become police evidence, the last images of the 5 cousins alive. By dawn, Pine Hollow was silent again. When the sheriff arrived 2 days later, he found coffee mugs by the sink, jackets on hooks, and the cabin doors bolted shut from the inside. The only clue was Mia's camera, left on the table, its final frame showing a streak of light, as if the lens had caught something moving in the dark. For 25 years, no one dared to return to Pine Hollow until now, because this fall, one of the cousins' names just appeared in a hospital registry. 300 miles away, the road into Pine Hollow looked different now. Wider, paved, civilized. But for Margaret Vale, every turn still felt haunted. She pulled her rental SUV onto the shoulder and cut the engine. The air smelled of pine and burnt dust. For the first time in 25 years, she was back where her family had vanished. She had been 17 then, too young to join the weekend trip. Her mother had forbidden it, saying she wasn't ready to spend nights drinking with her older cousins. Margaret had sulked all weekend, but on Sunday, no one came home. That was the year her world went silent. Holidays faded. Family photos disappeared from mantels. The Hartley name became something whispered. Margaret learned to carry her grief like a second shadow. Until now. 3 months ago, she had received an email from a documentary team called Dark Trails. They were producing a series about unsolved American disappearances, and the Pine Hollow case topped their list. Margaret had refused at first. She didn't want to reopen old wounds. But when the producer mentioned new evidence, something in her had shifted. Now, here she was, staring through a tangle of trees at the place where 5 young lives had simply stopped existing. A voice startled her. "Margaret Vale?" She turned. A tall man with a camera bag crossed the road toward her. "Ethan Cole," he said, extending a hand. "Field producer," Margaret hesitated, then shook it. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. Ethan smiled faintly. "That's how most of our best stories start." Together, they walked toward the waiting van. 2 others stood beside it, a woman with headphones looped around her neck and a man leaning against the hood, his arms crossed. Margaret recognized him instantly from his documentaries. Daniel Ross, investigative journalist turned host. His calm, deliberate voice had narrated countless mysteries. "Miss Vale," he said, stepping forward. "Thank you for agreeing to this." "I'm not sure how much help I'll be," she replied quietly. "You'll be more than you think," Daniel said. "You lived the aftermath. That matters." They started down the overgrown trail toward the cabin. The forest closed around them, heavy with silence. Daniel's tone softened. "The county tried to tear it down years ago," he said. "No one claimed ownership, so it just waited." The last word lingered like fog. When they reached the clearing, Margaret froze. The cabin still stood, sunken and rotting, its porch collapsed, its windows hollow. The swing still dangled, moving faintly, though there was no wind. Ethan raised his camera. The sound of the lens zooming in cut through the still air. Margaret whispered, "It's like it's been holding its breath for 25 years." But when Daniel stepped inside and pointed to the old fireplace, he said something that made her blood run cold. "Someone lit a fire here." After they disappeared, the air inside the old cabin was thick. Part mildew, part memory. Dust floated in pale beams of light, breaking through warped shutters. The scent of damp wood and rust clung to every breath. Margaret hesitated on the threshold as Daniel's voice echoed softly. "See the hearth?" He crouched beside the cold stone fireplace. Sheriff's report said the fire was still warm when they found it, 2 days after the cousins vanished. Margaret frowned. "Meaning someone came back? Or never left?" Daniel said quietly. The words hung like fog. Ethan's camera hummed as he filmed the room. Overturned chairs, cracked shelves, a forgotten beer can, everything coated in time. Margaret's eyes drifted toward the table where a circle of dust outlined something long gone. She swallowed hard. "My cousin Mia's camera was here. The police found it, but not the memory card." Daniel looked up. "That's not in the official report." "Neither was much else," Margaret said bitterly. Ethan adjusted the boom mic. "We should get B-roll outside soon," he murmured. "Lights fading." But Daniel's attention was fixed on a blackened patch near the hearth. "There's more," he said. The fire had 2 layers of ash. One from the night they vanished, one from the next morning. Someone tended it after the sheriff's estimated time of disappearance. Margaret's pulse quickened. "Someone stayed here," Daniel nodded grimly. "Or returned to erase something." Ethan swung the camera toward her face. "What do you feel being back here?" Her throat tightened. "Like I'm standing inside a lie," she said. "Every picture, every story they told us about that night. All of it feels rehearsed now." Daniel moved closer to the fireplace, brushing dust aside. "Most people think time buries the truth," he said. "But sometimes it just waits for someone stubborn enough to dig it up." Margaret tried to steady her breath, but her chest ached. She could almost see the 5 of them. Jesse's steady smile, Brooke's sarcasm, Ryan's guitar leaning against the wall, Emily's wild laugh bouncing off the rafters. And then, in her mind's eye, the firelight dimming, one by one, their voices vanishing. The cabin creaked suddenly, wood groaning overhead. Ethan flinched, his camera jerking. "Wind?" But there was no wind. Daniel straightened, his expression unreadable. "This place isn't empty," he said quietly. "Something's been here, waiting." Margaret stared at the cold hearth, her reflection faint in the dark glass of the fireplace screen. For a moment, she thought she saw movement behind her. A flicker, like a figure turning away. She spun around. Nothing. Only silence. Then Ethan whispered, "Dan, there's fresh mud on the floor by the door, and it's not ours." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "That mud, it's fresh." Daniel knelt by the entryway, his flashlight grazing across the floorboards. The print was faint, smeared, but unmistakable. The outline of a bare foot, smaller than a man's, maybe a woman's. Margaret's stomach dropped. Could that be one of theirs? Daniel shook his head. Impossible. These boards are new. Someone's been here recently. Ethan zoomed in on the mark, his lens trembling slightly. You think the sheriff knew about this? Daniel's reply was measured. If he did, he buried it. This case was closed too quickly, too cleanly. That never happens without reason. Margaret stared at the footprint. It seemed to stare back. A whisper from the past, half erased, half begging to be seen. Let's take a break, Daniel said softly. We'll regroup in town. There's someone who might talk now. Someone who never did before. They left the cabin as the light began to fade. The woods were too quiet again. The swing still moved, creaking gently. Margaret caught herself watching it as though it might speak. Back in town, the neon hum of a roadside diner felt almost alive compared to the suffocating silence of Pine Hollow. They slid into a booth at the back. The waitress poured coffee without asking, as if she already knew who they were and why they'd come. Across from them sat Karen Holt, a woman in her 50s, her gray hair cropped short, her eyes restless. "You're Margaret Vale," she said softly. "I was your age when it happened. My father was Sheriff Holt. He led the original investigation." Margaret leaned forward. "Then you know something," Karen hesitated. "My father died convinced that case was rigged. Reports rewritten. Evidence missing?" He used to mutter about the wrong people owning the land. He said Pine Hollow was never meant to be a home. It was built to hide things. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Hide what?" Karen sipped her coffee, her gaze flicking between them. "My father mentioned a notebook. One of your cousins had it. Said it vanished before he could log it into evidence." Margaret froze. "A notebook? Who had it?" "He never said. But he told me one thing before he passed. The kids didn't just disappear. They found something. And someone made sure it stayed buried." The words felt like a weight pressing on Margaret's chest. All her life she had imagined random tragedy, strangers, accidents, bad luck. But now the truth loomed darker. Family secrets and old debts that had never died. Daniel leaned back, eyes dark. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we find that notebook." Karen's hand trembled as she set down her cup. "If you do," she warned, "don't read what's inside. Some truths shouldn't survive the light." Morning broke pale and heavy over the hills. Mist clung to the trees like it didn't want to let go. Margaret hadn't slept. Karen's warning kept circling her mind. Some truths shouldn't survive the light. At 7, Daniel's knock came sharp against her motel door. He carried coffee in one hand and an old folded map in the other. "We're going back," he said. "Your cousin's notebook. I think we can find it." Margaret frowned. "You think it's still there? After all these years?" Daniel unfolded the map on the small desk. Karen's father's notes mention structural repairs in 1999. The floor plan shows an unaccounted space behind the fireplace wall. A cavity that wasn't supposed to exist. She felt her pulse quicken. "You think it's hidden there?" He met her gaze. "If your cousin found proof of whatever your grandfather was involved in, he wouldn't have destroyed it. He'd have hidden it." By mid-morning, they were back at the cabin. The woods were still, as if watching. Ethan carried the gear while Ryan, their sound tech, unpacked lights and gloves. Daniel's movements were deliberate. A crowbar, a chisel, measured taps against cedar. Thunk. Thunk. The hollow echo came from behind the hearth. He smiled grimly. "There it is," he pried loose a board. Dust exploded into the sunlight, and behind it, a small wooden box, blackened by time. Margaret's breath caught. Daniel slid it out carefully, setting it on the old table. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its spine cracked, initials stamped faintly in gold. "J.H., your grandfather?" Daniel asked. Margaret nodded, her throat dry. "James Hartley." Daniel opened it gently. The pages were yellowed, lined with neat handwriting, numbers, initials, property transfers, all tied to parcels around Pine Hollow. Some entries were circled, others crossed out, and on one page, a note written in a different hand. They know. Stop using the cabin. Too many eyes. Margaret's skin prickled. Who wrote that? Daniel shook his head. Whoever did, they were warning him. Ethan zoomed in, filming the text, whispering, "This isn't just a notebook. It's evidence." Margaret stared at the ink. Her grandfather, the man who built the place where they played as children, had been part of something that got her cousins killed. The wind outside picked up suddenly, rattling the broken shutters. Dust spiraled through the sunlight. Daniel closed the ledger. "We need to get this back to town. Whatever's in here, it changes everything." Margaret hesitated, eyes drifting toward the trees beyond the window. For the first time, she felt certain someone was out there, watching, and just before they stepped outside, she noticed it. A second note tucked beneath the ledger's spine, written in faded ink, "If you find this, don't trust the sheriff." Margaret stared at the faded words. Don't trust the sheriff. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Daniel lifted the paper carefully, his brow furrowing. Your cousin must have written this before they disappeared. He knew someone in law enforcement was involved. Ethan's camera caught every flicker of expression. So the sheriff covered it up? Daniel's voice was grim, or helped cause it. The air outside the cabin felt heavier now, almost electric. The forest seemed to hum. They packed the ledger into a sealed case and started down the path toward the vehicles. But Margaret couldn't shake the sensation of being followed. Twigs snapping, the faint smell of smoke that didn't belong. At the bottom of the hill, Daniel paused. Let's split. Ethan, take the ledger back to town. Margaret and I will swing by the records office to verify these land entries. Ethan hesitated. You sure? Daniel nodded. Safer that way, they parted. But as Margaret and Daniel reached the old gravel road, a pickup truck came rumbling up behind them. Dented, mud-caked, its headlights too bright for daylight. The driver slowed. It was Sheriff Claiborne himself. Morning, Miss Vale, he said through his open window, voice too calm. Heard you've been digging around where you shouldn't. Margaret froze. Daniel stepped forward slightly. We're revisiting an open case, Sheriff. With evidence, Claiborne's eyes darkened. You don't know what kind of fire you're about to start. Maybe one that's long overdue, Daniel replied. For a moment, no one moved. Then Claiborne's truck rolled forward, slow, deliberate, before he drove off toward the cabin. Margaret's stomach turned. He's going after Ethan, Daniel swore under his breath. They sprinted back up the trail. The woods swallowed sound, branches clawing at their clothes. Smoke curled faintly through the trees. When they reached the clearing, Ethan's van was gone, and the cabin's porch smoldered, flames licking the old timber. Ethan! Margaret shouted, coughing on smoke. No answer, only the hiss of burning wood. Daniel pulled her back as a beam collapsed. It's gone, he said. He's destroying evidence. Margaret's eyes burned, from the smoke, from fury. Then we tell the world. That night, she uploaded Ethan's footage to Dark Trails. The ledger pages, the warning, the sheriff's threat. Everything. Within hours, the internet erupted. Comments, calls, whispers. The case that had haunted Pine Hollow for decades was alive again. Days later, authorities found Sheriff Claiborne's truck abandoned near the river, the driver missing. And from the ash of the burned cabin, investigators recovered a single charred page from the ledger. A list of initials and dates, one circled in red ink MV, September 15, 2023. Margaret stared at it in disbelief. The date was from 2 weeks ago. Someone had already added her name. As the night wind swept through the blackened ruins of Pine Hollow, Margaret finally understood. The past hadn't been buried at all. It had just been waiting for her.